Point of order, Sarah Boyack.
Point of order, Presiding Officer. While I welcome the opportunity to hear from the Acting Cabinet Sec on the Scottish Government's plans to update their climate change update plan, shouldn't we have had the opportunity to hear from the Scottish Government after they've properly considered the UK Climate Change Committee's Scotland Carbon Budgets Advice Report, which I understand is due to be released tomorrow? And when I ask why the Scottish Government didn't move timing of their statement, given that this has actually happened before?
Thank you, Ms Boyack. That is not a point of order. We'll move on to the next item of business, which is a statement by Gillian Martin on Climate Change Plan Monitoring Report 2025. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, and so there should be no interventions or interruptions. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think members across the Chamber will agree with me when I say that Scotland damaged irreparably by the effects of climate change and nature loss is not a Scotland that any of us wants to see. Climate change is not a far-off concern, it's a reality, and its effects are already being felt in our everyday lives and the lives of our constituents. It's a reality which includes more violent storms like Storm Ian earlier this year, more severe droughts and wildfires like those seen right now in Murray and recently in Arran and West Lothian, as well as life-changing floods. Climate change is not a figment of our collective imagination, and polling shows that the majority of Scots believe that climate change is an urgent problem and agree on the importance and magnitude of the task at hand. Research from world-leading experts, including the world's economic watchdog, the OECD, shows that taking strong action to tackle the climate crisis and investing in transitions away from the causes of climate change will increase countries' economic growth, as well as making our environment healthier. Concerningly, climate scepticism is gaining traction in both public, parliamentary and media discourse, in spite of overwhelming scientific evidence that it is an existential threat. And anti-climate rhetoric presents a serious challenge to our ability to deal with the crisis, and it's one that we must confront collectively and constructively in this Parliament and across our society. Presiding Officer, the purpose of the statement today is to update Parliament on the progress of our most recent climate change plan, which was updated in 2021. And today, the Scottish Government published its 5th annual statutory monitoring report for the updated climate change plan, and I'll be able to answer questions on that monitoring report. It tracks progress in up to 200 ambitious policies that are outlined in our existing climate change plan, utilising a robust monitoring framework. The monitoring framework sets a series of policy indicators for each outcome of the plan, a specific measurable indication of progress. The Scottish Government then reviews each policy indicator against the most recent data available and assesses each indicator as to on track, off track or too early to say. This year's progress report shows that out of 43 indicators, 16 policy indicators are on track, 17 are off and 10 are deemed too early to say. Firstly, I think it's important to note that we do not believe that the off-track indicators in this report jeopardise our ability to reach our ambitious goal of net zero by 2045. That's 5 years ahead of the rest of the UK. However, it does say to me that we all should understand and investigate the reasons behind why we are off track in those areas and ramp up action, whether that be as parliamentarians, industry, the public and private sector, and our citizens, because it is the responsibility of all of us. We are fully committed to taking decisive action to ensure that we get back on track and make meaningful progress towards our goal. Presiding Officer, in the 4 years since the last climate change plan was finalised, we have extended free bus travel to now benefit over 2.3 million people, published a landmark Circular Economy Act, introduced a ban on the supply and manufacturing of certain problematic single-use plastic items, including single-use cutlery, plates, food containers and more. Fully allocated the £30 million Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Fund, which is expected to deliver approximately 6,000 additional public charge points by 2030. In 23-24, we created over 15,000 hectares of new woodland, and that is the highest for 34 years. We have committed to restoring over 10,000 hectares of peatland in 24-25, with an ambition to restore at least 14,000 hectares of peatland in 25-26. We brought the new build heat standard into force. We've published a draft Transport Just Transition Plan. We've put reforms in place for tackling agricultural emissions. And we launched an Emerging Energy Technologies Fund. I'll say that again. We launched an Emerging Energy Technologies Fund, committing £80 million of funding to support the development of carbon capture and storage and negative emissions technologies in Scotland. And in our programme for government, published at the start of this month, we committed to getting rid of ScotRail peak rail fares to encourage commuters to use public transport. We extended our Nature Restoration Fund and are going to establish statutory targets to improve biodiversity. We banned the supply and sale of single-use vapes. That will be done by the 1st of June this year. And we're introducing our Heat and Buildings Bill by the end of this parliamentary term. So Scotland is halfway to net zero. However, despite all of the progress, it's important to note the UK Government do still hold key policy levers with which to deliver a net zero future that will make all our lives healthier, our communities more resilient, and indeed tackle fuel poverty at the same time as reducing those harmful emissions. So I once again call on the UK Government to act in a number of ways. It's essential that the UK Government provides certainty in the upcoming spending review so that all investors can continue their work on developing the Acorn carbon capture and storage project. Carbon capture and storage is vital for the just transition, and the Climate Change Committee has advised many times that they cannot see a route to net zero that does not include carbon capture and storage. Presiding Officer, today we have also published the annual update to the Scottish Nitrogen Balance Sheet, which tracks how efficiently nitrogen is being used in Scotland, and this can help identify further opportunities for improvement and supports in our progress towards net zero, given that nitrogen is our third most prevalent greenhouse gas. Scotland continues to be ahead of the UK as a whole in delivering long-term emissions reductions, but the year ahead will be absolutely critical in setting us on the path to net zero in 2045. I'm confident that we will continue to lead on climate action that is fair, ambitious and capable of rising to the emergency before us. We'll soon be setting out our proposed emissions trajectory to 2045 based on 5-year carbon budgets through secondary legislation to amend the Climate Change Scotland 2009 Act. And tomorrow, our independent advisers, the Climate Change Committee, will publish their advice on what they believe those carbon budgets levels to be. We will carefully consider the committee's advice before bringing forward regulations to set Scotland's carbon budget levels. This will include consideration of the target-setting criteria set out under the Act and an assessment of whether the pace of decarbonisation is appropriate for people, sectors and businesses across Scotland. The carbon budgets proposed via secondary legislation will provide an achievable pathway to net zero in 2045, one that takes the public with us, leaving no one behind. That will be followed by a new climate change plan outlining our policies and proposals for reducing emissions between 2026 and 2040. This will be brought forward shortly after the carbon budget secondary legislation has been approved. The scale of the change needed for the next part of our journey is significant, but it also comes with significant benefits for our communities. Delivering our ambitious climate targets transforms our economy and society, and they will be underpinned by sustained investment, both public and private, in infrastructure. A Net Zero Scotland is one that is more resilient to global shocks, weather events, and has a growing economy with high-value job opportunities. And Professor Graham Roy, the chair of the Scottish Fiscal Commission, said, and I quote, "Not responding to the challenge of climate change will be far more expensive and damaging to the public finances than investing in net zero. It is simply not an option." Presiding Officer, there is no small task in front of all of us, but through considered action and commitment of this Government and with the support of this Parliament and the public, we will set Scotland on the correct course for a healthier future. Thank you.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the issues raised in her statement. I intend to allow around 20 minutes for questions, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. And I'd be grateful if all members who wish to put a question were to press their request to speak buttons now. And I call Douglas Lumsden.
Thank you, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of this statement. Presiding Officer, only this devolved government could have a climate change plan monitoring report when we don't actually have a climate change plan after they were forced to ditch it. And only 16 of the 43 indicators are on track from this update. But this devolved government shamelessly claimed to be world leading. You couldn't make it up. More pathetic spin from this out-of-touch government. And I don't think world leaders will be calling to ask this government for advice. They need a reality check. We need a common-sense, affordable transition that takes households with us, and not a transition that will make families poorer and wider inequalities. And our rural communities are paying the price for this government's folly of putting all their eggs into one renewable basket, with hundreds of battery storage sites, stub stations and monster pylons scarring our countryside. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, is this a price our rural communities just have to pay for net zero? And the Energy Strategy and Just Transition Plan is years late. So will the Cabinet Secretary confirm if it will be issued before the summer recess, or do you have no idea? And now that countries like Denmark have come to realise that nuclear has a part to play in clean, green power, will they also get their head out of the sand and drop their ban on nuclear power?
Cabinet Secretary.
Scotland has a very good story to tell in terms of the drive to renewables and indeed reducing the emissions associated with the electricity supply. That is why we're actually 50%, we have actually achieved 50% on our target for 2045. I do have to correct Mr Lumsden. He says that I'm commenting on a climate change plan that doesn't exist. We have a climate change plan that was published in 2021, and as part of the legislation associated with the Climate Change Act at the time, we have to produce reports such as the one I'm speaking to today. So that is based on the climate change plan from 2021. Of course, what I've set out to Parliament, and indeed the members of the committee should be very well versed on this, is that there will be the next climate change plan for the next 5 years will be set out once we have the secondary legislation had gone through Parliament as a result of the advice that I'm receiving tomorrow from the Climate Change Committee. The secondary legislation associated with the carbon budget they will put in place, which is new legislation for us. And indeed, as soon as that is agreed, we will be putting forward the next climate change plan. And indeed, as part of that climate change plan, there will be yearly statements like the one that I'm giving today. So we're fully committed to addressing the challenges in front of us and taking decisive action. Now, Douglas Lumsden seems to think that we can do this without renewables getting onto the grid. And I would suggest that I don't speak as a North East MSP, I'm Cabinet Secretary speaking at the moment, but also as a North East MSP, I think it's important to realise that there will be thousands of jobs associated with this, thousands of jobs associated with the build-out of ScotWind for the north and the north east of Scotland, and indeed we could be looking at replacing many of the jobs that will inevitably, unfortunately, disappear as a result of the downturn in oil and gas in the basin. So how we do that is important. The fact that we have to do it is critical. We have to do it. But I do take Douglas Lumsden's point about how we do it and how we bring communities with us. And that is something that I am determined to work across all parties on, because the actual fact that we have to do it and we have to decarbonise is actually a scientific fact.
Sarah Boyack.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance notice of her statement? I agree the climate emergency is now having a negative impact on communities. So when are we going to see the action across Scotland to reduce our damaging climate emissions? Given none of this is new and the Scottish Government has been rolling back on commitments, continually missing targets, how can our constituents have any confidence the progress they need will actually be delivered? So will the Cabinet Secretary acknowledge the climate change plan needs to focus on using the powers of the Parliament to the max and publish a working draft now? Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what the Government's doing to get the 17 indicators which are off track back on track? What the Government's doing to make people's existing homes warmer and energy efficient? And given they've dumped their car reduction target, what's the government doing to ensure people have access to the buses they urgently need across our urban and rural communities?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, thanks, Sarah Bowick, for a question. And I don't have time to go through every one of the 17 indicators, but I would like to point to a couple of them. Obviously, the landfilled waste is one of the indicators in which we are slightly off track. We want to have a situation where landfilled waste from municipal local authorities does not go to landfill. So we've actually given £70 million of a recycling improvement fund, and most of that has been given, in fact 95% of that has been given to local authorities. Obviously the package of responsibility will make a big difference to local authorities as well. On the cars point, I think it's important to recognise the diverse nature of Scotland, and there's going to be some areas in which a car is always going to be necessary in Scotland. And with that in mind, and Ms Hislop's with me just now, the actual delivery on the amount of EV charging points in Scotland has actually exceeded what we promised. And indeed, what we need to be doing is concentrating on our urban environments to improve public transport for people, and you should not really need to have a car in places like central Edinburgh. But in order to do that, and if I talk about the transition to electric vehicles in particular, which are also some of the indicators that we're not going as far as fast as we could be, we have to recognise what are the barriers in place for people in terms of purchasing EVs. So it's about the charging infrastructure, which we have massively improved, but it's also that Scotland's is the only country in the UK that still has grants and loans associated with buying EVs, but also the infrastructure and the home charging infrastructure associated with that. And these are areas in which we're actually making big improvements in order to give those people that are making the decisions about what car to drive the choice and the ability to do that without undue expense.
Elena Whittam, to be followed by Maurice Golden.
Can the Cabinet Secretary please outline what steps the Scottish Government is taking to support investment in renewables, particularly through the 2025-26 Scottish Budget, and how this investment is expected to help grow and develop this vital sector across Scotland, especially given how well placed we are as a nation to harness our renewable potential?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. So, Elena Whittam mentioned the Scottish Budget. We're investing up to £500 million over 5 years to support market certainty and create a highly productive and competitive offshore wind economy and support thousands of jobs while embedding that innovation and boosting skills. And our investment's expected to leverage an additional private investment of £1.5 billion in the infrastructure and the manufacturing facilities that are critical to growing the offshore wind sector. We're almost tripling our capital funding in offshore wind to £150 million in 25-26. And the expansion of offshore wind represents a once-in-a-generation opportunity that will create thousands of high-quality jobs, but also increase the supply of clean electricity to the whole of Scotland and beyond. And this, the jobs associated with that will drive growth, foster innovation, generate wealth, and over time the amount of electricity that we're producing should bring down the cost of electricity as well for households. And that's why we're also targeting funding into colleges as well with regards to the skills required to establish an offshore wind skills programme, which will help to create region-specific training hubs for offshore wind skills, including in Ms Whittam's constituency.
Maurice Golden, to be followed by Jackie Dunbar.
Officer, local authority managed charge points cost around the same price as petrol, although they're often broken. Private charge points cost double. Those people with a driveway, who are generally richer, can charge at home for a fraction of the price. It's not fair for the hundreds of thousands of Scots who are being priced out of the EV market. So, will the Cabinet Secretary guarantee that the new charge points will cost less than petrol?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm always interested to see Maurice Golden's political journey, because it sounds very much like something that I would say indeed about the cost of the wholesale electricity price, which has to come down for consumers more generally. He is, of course, right to point out that the public charging points obviously are more expensive than having the home charging points. That speaks also to the point that I made earlier about us as a government still giving grants and loans associated with home charging, but that's not right for everyone. So really, I hope he will join me in calling for a reduction in the more wholesale electricity price more generally for us in order to be able to roll out more users of EVs. But this is not just this is not just an issue for EV charging. This is an issue for the reducing our reliance on burning gas to heat our homes as well. So the electricity price is something that I am obviously lobbying the UK government on with regards to the REMA consultation that they've got at the moment, because he's absolutely right. Until we can have a situation where the wholesale price of electricity goes down, we will see people looking upon that as a barrier to adopting an electric vehicle. But we are doing what we can in the Scottish Government to provide certainty in the infrastructure and indeed to help households put in their own charging points.
Jackie Dunbar, to be followed by Mercedes Vialba.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's recognised that a just transition will play a crucial role in our fight to tackle climate change. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise what steps the Scottish Government are taking to improve funding for a just transition in Scotland? Can she advise how the £500 million Just Transition Fund for the North East and Moray is contributing to this? And will she join me again in calling for the UK Government to match this ambition?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Jackie Dunbar for that question. And this month, as she mentioned, we launched a new funding call worth up to £8.5 million for the North East and Moray Just Transition Fund over the coming year. And that's ensuring that we continue to create jobs, support innovation and secure the highly skilled workforce for the future. And since 2022, we've allocated £75 million to projects, both projects that, of the like that I've just mentioned in terms of innovation and creation of jobs, but also to communities through the region, through including £9.7 million on a package of skills interventions, £30 million on innovative projects and approaches, as well as £4 million empowering and investing in communities. An independent evaluation of the fund during its first years, which I asked for ahead of rolling out this particular tranche, is going to be published shortly, and it points to the real impact in providing momentum to just transition in the region. And that includes providing over 750 training places, safeguarding and creating at least 230 jobs, and attracting over £34 million of additional private investment. The fund sends a clear signal of our support to the North East and Moray, and I would call on the UK Government, of course, to match this ambition to deliver a fair and just transition to net zero, so we can do even more.
Thank you. We have used up a considerable amount of time for questions, and we have reached question 5. I'd be grateful for concise questions and responses. I call Mercedes Vialba, to be followed by Audrey Nicholl.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of her statement. Ahead of World Biodiversity Day on Thursday, I'm glad to hear the Minister acknowledging the reality of the catastrophic impact a rapidly changing climate is having on our environment. But isn't it telling that nowhere in that statement was the Scottish Government's Natural Environment Bill mentioned? Is that because at a time of severe droughts, wildfires and life-changing floods, all of which put further species at risk, the Natural Environment Bill in its current form does not bind itself to the very 2045 goal referenced in today's statement? Ambitious goals sound great, but it's getting the job done that matters. So how confident is the Minister that this Government can meet its 2045 goal?
Cabinet Secretary.
I didn't mention the Natural Environment Bill because I was talking about the CCP monitoring report, which was obviously about the indicators that were in there, and I thought it was a good idea to stick to the monitoring report as a subject matter. But of course, she's right, we are introducing a Natural Environment Bill which will set targets towards declining nature loss. And she makes a very good point about the impact of biodiversity in some of the climate, the negative aspects that we're starting to see in Scotland of climate change. Climate change is on Scotland's doorstep. It is not something that happens in other countries. It's not something that happens in the global south. It actually happens here too. We're seeing wildfires in Moray today, and yesterday we're seeing water scarcity across the whole of the east of Scotland. So all the money that we spend in climate change and adaptation, and we put into our Scottish Adaptation Plan, is actually future-proofing Scotland to be more resilient in the face of climate change as well, not least in the area of biodiversity.
Thank you. Audrey Nicholl, to be followed by Patrick Harvie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following on this theme, can the Cabinet Secretary advise how the Scottish Government, the Scottish Biodiversity Strategy will build upon the steps Scotland has already taken to address the biodiversity crisis, particularly with regard to Scotland's rivers, which are so crucial to our environment but face a triple impact associated with more intensive flood and drought events and rising temperatures?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity Audrey Nicholl has given me to lay out what we're doing in terms of addressing the twin crisis. And I think it's very important that she puts them both together. I think sometimes we do forget that they are twin crises that are inextricably linked. Restoring and protecting nature helps reduce carbon emissions and helps us to adapt to climate change, as I just said in my answer to Mercedes Villalba. Sat out in our biodiversity strategy and underpinning delivery plan, there are already significant steps we're taking to become net zero and nature positive. The Minister for Climate Action announced last week we've invested over £65 million through our innovative Nature Restoration Fund, which supports hundreds of projects across Scotland to take positive action for nature. And we also announced in the programme for government will continue to support the Nature Restoration Fund in the next financial year and ensure we're investing in protecting and restoring our precious natural capital and bringing environmental, social and economic benefits across Scotland. And as I've mentioned, we are introducing the Natural Environment Bill to support that ambition.
Patrick Harvie, to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
I'm grateful for the advance sight of the statement, though I have to say the monitoring report itself only became available to members during the Cabinet Secretary's statement, and the chance to have seen that in advance would have been more useful. Does the Cabinet Secretary acknowledge that the problem we've got here is not just that fewer indicators are on track and more of them are off track than was the case a year ago? The problem is also that the Scottish Government has spent that year diluting, delaying and downgrading climate-positive policies, so more of what's in the too early to say column is going to be off track by this time next year. Will they change direction and restore the ambition on areas like clean heating, where they've clearly downgraded and ditched the policy commitments they previously made?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, first of all, I would like to apologise if people didn't receive the report. It was sent out. I was under the impression that it was sent out well in advance. So I would like to apologise for that, and I'm going to look into why that's been the case, because that is not an optimal situation. Patrick Harvie and I may disagree on how we get there, but we are still on track to net zero for 2045. I believe that we should be doing all the climate action that we take should be achievable and should be something that brings the country with us. And we need to get a lot better throughout this Parliament and in discourse in general about showing to the public why it is important for them to get behind the actions that we take, but also the Parliament as a whole needs to look seriously at ramping up of some of the actions that we need to take as well, and actually talking about it in positive terms about what that's actually going to mean for well-being of people in this Scotland. But we also have to bear in mind that we have a cost of living crisis as well, so we often have to keep in mind that when we put the climate action that we want to in place, that is affordable and is part of a just transition.
Liam MacArthur, to be followed by Emma Harper.
Thank you. As the Cabinet Secretary will know, key to reducing emissions will be reducing emissions in heat. We still don't have a date now for the redrafted Heat in Buildings Bill. This Parliament has been asked to pass emergency or expedited legislation on issues from climate change through to prisoner release, which I think we can all agree is not ideal in terms of the scrutiny process. So what assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that this Parliament will have sufficient time to scrutinise that key piece of legislation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Dr Allen has said on record that the Heat and Buildings Bill will be going through Parliament in the next parliamentary year. Well, it's also important to mention what we have done in this space before we have the bill in place. We've allocated £1.63 billion of funding through our heat and building schemes this parliamentary session so far, and that's including committed spend over £575 million for energy efficient and clean projects as well. So we're not having to wait for a bill in order to be delivering action, but that bill, I can confirm, I didn't realise that there was doubt about that bill actually being put forward to Parliament in the next parliamentary year, but that will happen in the time that I have said.
Emma Harper, to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's renewable energy sector has the potential to be a great export opportunity for Scotland as part of the just transition and our climate ambitions. Can the Cabinet Secretary speak to the importance of redevelopment of energy sites such as Chapel Cross at Annan in my South Scotland region in ensuring Scotland is equipped with the powers to harness our clean energy and help drive down emissions while encouraging growth in the renewable sector?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Emma Harper for her question. The Borderlands Inclusive Growth Deal includes a project to deliver infrastructure to support the redevelopment of the former nuclear site at Chapel Cross, and the development of Chapel Cross in the energy transition zone will transform the local economy, creating the conditions for growth and actively kick-starting and building a market with high-value jobs. That's a multi-million-pound development. It will include hydrogen production, storage, associated logistics, advanced manufacturing, energy and enterprise campuses as well. And there has already been significant interest from business from out with the South keen to move into the region, which I think we'd all welcome, including Greencat Hydrogen, who are developing a 45-megawatt green hydrogen production facility at the site. And it's potentially going to transform the local economy by creating around 50 high-skilled jobs.
Thank you. We are over the time allocated for this item. I'm keen to get all members in, so please let's be concise. Graham Simpson, to be followed by Marie McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Having had a chance to have a quick read of the report, I can see that one of the indicators which is off track is in woodland creation. So we need ambitious action on tree planting. So can the Cabinet Secretary tell us what she's planning to do to get things on track?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, one of the things that we do in government, and I have two of my colleagues with me in the front bench today who are absolutely integral to their drive towards emissions reduction, and that is in the agricultural and rural affairs space and the transport space as well. In terms of, there actually was a significant rise in woodland creation in 23-24 to 15,040 hectares, which was an increase. It was below the target, and we need to do more. This included those 7,700 hectares of native woodland. And we're now in a situation where, yes, we do absolutely need to ramp up action, and Graham Simpson's absolutely right. We have to ramp up action in terms of woodland creation, but also in peatland restoration as well. And peatland restoration in particular, I think we have to be looking at the high-emitting sites, not just in terms of hectareage, but actually where the largest emissions are actually taking place, and do that targeted approach as well.
Marie McNair, to be followed by Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Public transport uptake plays a key role in reducing emissions across Scotland. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how bold initiatives and generous schemes, including abolishing peak rail fares for good, from the Scottish Government is working to encourage Scots to use public transport and support tackling climate crises?
Cabinet Secretary.
Marie McNair is right to point to the peak rails, the peak rail fares initiative in the Scottish Programme for Government, and also we spend over £2 billion to support public transport. And that, as I mentioned in my statement, that's 2.3 million people in Scotland who have access to free bus travel. Around 334 million passenger journeys were made by bus in Scotland in 23-24, which is an increase of 13% in the previous year. And of course, since launching the free travel for under-22s, 218 million free journeys have been taken by young people, and 800,000 cars have been issued to young people as well. So the budget includes an allocation of £3 million for the flat fare pilot, and it's due to commence in January 2026 and will continue. But we're also at the early stages of the fare cap pilot development as well. Presiding Officer, I can see I'm being wound up. Thank you.
Thank you. A brief supplementary, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm if the energy strategy will be issued before the summer recess, yes or no?
Cabinet Secretary.
As I have said many times in this Parliament, we are working on the energy strategy to revise it in light of some of the court proceedings that have happened in the UK Supreme Court.
And finally, a brief question, Fergus Ewing.
In my constituency, a house builder states that he cannot get an electricity connection for a large development of affordable and mid-market rent houses because of green tape requiring a new heat pump and electricity vehicle charging points, leading to the electricity demand tripling. Is this a case of green tape stymieing the creation of the houses that will be needed for the 18,000 jobs that HI predict will be created for the renewables revolution? And if so, will they remove it so that we can have the people to deliver the renewables revolution in the Highlands?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm making an assumption that it's the new build heat standard that Mr Ewan might be referring to, but if I can make a wider point, what he outlines shows the absolute necessity of more grid infrastructure connections happening across not just Scotland but the whole of the UK, so that the green electricity that is being produced can actually make it into the grid, and it means that we can have more developments like Mr Ewing, the one that Mr Ewing has mentioned, having connection.
Thank you. That concludes the ministerial statement on the Climate Change Plan monitoring reports. There will be a brief suspension before we move on to the next item of business.